Hi, everyone. Welcome in. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. If everyone wants to introduce themselves in the chat, please feel free. You can state your name, where you're calling in from, and maybe like one last song that you really liked that you heard recently, or a song that you like to start your day. How about that?
So we'll start in about a minute or so, just giving folks some time to join. Well, great. Let me share my screen. So folks, feel free to introduce yourselves. But I know that there might be other folks that'll join us midway, no problem. I hope you all can see my screen. You could also see one another on the side, wherever you are. So welcome. Welcome to our Healing Together event. We do these every month just as a way to bring our community together to talk about, the eventual goal for all of us around issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, as well as breaking bias, which is healing. So today we'll kind of focus in a little bit on this idea of skillful communication. And I'm just really, really excited that you're all here because it's one of my favorite topics. So if you don't know me, my name is 𝐖𝐚𝐭𝐜𝐡. I'm the founder of Be More with a Name. And what we do here at Be More is, we are an edtech company that trains organizations in breaking implicit bias, unconscious bias to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So I'll talk more about that later, but let's actually begin. And I know that there'll be more folks joining us as we continue today. So we like to start all of our programs with just a short mindfulness exercise to settle us in. We'll be talking about a lot of big topics, bias, diversity, healing. So just to center us, giving us some space to breathe, returning to whatever intentions we have for our time together. So I'm just going to invite you all to come to a comfortable seated position wherever you are. We'll be here for another 2.5 minutes or so. Just taking a minute to just root yourself into your breath. If it's comfortable, you may want to close your eyes. Place your gaze at a stationary point in front of you. And for these first few moments, just returning to your breath. Notice your inhales and your exhales. If there's activity in the mind, that's okay. Notice what's happening. Perhaps there's thinking or planning or something else. Let's see if you can become aware of it and then let that go, returning back to your breath. This breath that's been with you since the very moment you were born. Now, using that breath as an anchor to find any place in your body that may be tense, that may be holding right now. Perhaps your forehead, your jaw, your tongue, your shoulders or your hands. Just relax and release. If you're just joining us, that's okay. We're just beginning with a short mindfulness exercise. So let's just jump right in there. Just finding that sense of ease and openness in all parts of your body. And if there's any place that really feels particularly tender or tense, again, using that breath to bring that inhale and exhale. I like the mantra of relax, release, relax, release. Really opening up any constrictions that may be within. And as you find your center in your body with your breath, perhaps reflect on what is it that brought you here today? Why did you sign up for this? And then actually show up here. It's just a way for you to ground yourself in your deeper intention for a time together. So just bringing that to awareness. And then after your next exhale, you could bring your chin to your chest, stretching the back of your neck. Just slowly returning back to the room. You can open your eyes. If you need to stretch a little bit with your neck or your hands, feel free to do that. And then welcome back. You know, it's so great to see so many of you here. Some of you for the first time, others been here before, so welcome back. So yeah, we'd like to start all of our programs with just this quick centering, this quick mindfulness exercise, because mindfulness is like this practice of paying attention, this practice of being aware is really the kind of the core, the foundation of breaking bias, and also for our work together around healing and advancing equity. So we'll talk a lot more about that. So today is going to be an interactive session. And, you know, as some of you just joined us during the meditation, I just wanted to share that, you know, today's topic is particularly fresh for so many of us, you know, skillful communication. So, you know, I'm really going to be talking about what that is, what are the components of it, how do we practice it? And all of us are actually going to be practicing with each other in a dyad or a triad. One thing I did want to say before we jump in is that I don't have all the answers. You know, whatever, there's no silver bullet to this work, unfortunately, but fortunately, all of us have the genius within ourselves to really use the tools that we're talking about together and apply them to begin to create solutions. So with that, you know, I'd love for you all, if you haven't already, to use the chat function to introduce yourselves. You know, you can share your name and location where you're calling in or logging in from. And then, you know, what brought you here? So, hi, Luke. So great to see you here. I know you're calling in from the Catskills and listen to 𝐬𝐿𝐴, which is an awesome song. And then, hi, Yvonne. Welcome from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Wonderful. So great to see you. But we'd love to hear some of the other voices that are here. What is your intention in being here? What made you sign up? So we'll need a few seconds for folks to. So David H is from Kansas. That's great. Welcome. So we have quite a variety of representation. Selena is in Charlottesville, Virginia. That's wonderful. She's on her organization's equity team, so she's here to observe that. Welcome, Selena. So wait for another one or two folks to share, and we'll jump in. Aslan from Seattle. Great. So we've really covered the entire continent now. East Coast, Midwest, you know, and now the West Coast. And Colleen, also my colleague, she's in California. So here we are. And Shannon, she's with the Institute of Public and Preventive Health, hoping what they can use from this webinar to share with their colleagues. And then Brittany from Florida. Wonderful. Welcome, Brittany. Welcome, Shannon. So I know there's a few other folks joining us. So folks, if you want to just type down Feel free to introduce
Hello.
yourself in the chat, just name, location, and what brought you here together. And I'll just read one more. Meg, she's in Indiana, interested in exploring the concepts of the talk and being open to more ways of communicating effectively and thoughtfully. Beautiful, I love that. And then Luke, joined today to learn more and listen. I work in the corp comms at LinkedIn, also sit on a nonprofit board. The subjects of white supremacy, culture, and racial microaggression have come up in their board, among their board members, and hopefully we'll provide some tools to learn together. This is great. This is great. So let's jump right in, and folks, feel free to continue to talk, share any insights that come up for you all. We have a tight 35 minutes or so left. Dawn is in North Carolina. Wonderful, welcome, Dawn. So before we jump in, I know that it's going to be an interactive conversation, and for us to really build a safe container that's shame-free, and that really kind of enables compassion for everybody, we just ask you all to kind of abide by 5 shared agreements, and I'll review them quickly here. First is using I statements. So really using the opportunity to center what you believe, what you think, how you feel in your own experience. So I think, I believe, in my experience. So hopefully we can agree to that. The second is really commitment to dialogue, which we're going to get to today. Skillful communication is about that dialogue, but there are 2 components to dialogue. One is understanding, the other is compassion. So really keeping those 2 components in mind as we kind of commit to dialogue with ourselves, with one another, with the community as a whole. The third is staying present. So we started our time together with a mindfulness exercise because the crux of this work around healing, around breaking bias, around DEI is being present to whatever's arising. So if your mind drifts away into the past or moves to the future, that's okay. But just reminding yourself, hey, here I am in front of a screen, sitting, standing, walking, really taking that moment to ground yourself back in your bodies, which is connected to the 4th shared agreement, which is investigating discomfort. So this is really the crucial point around breaking bias and advancing DEI, because our bodies literally give us the cues that we need to understand how bias operates for us. So, for our time together in the safe container, perhaps use this time as a scientist of your own experience and really feel into the sensations, feel into the thoughts, the emotions that might arise, and document them, right? You'll notice over time they'll pass. So that is the seeing that we're really trying to hone in. Lastly, privacy and confidentiality. So of course, all the learning here, I hope you take it out into the world, to your teams, to your organizations. But of course, anything that's personal, that's shared, keeping that confidential, particularly in your small group that we'll break up into. So I hope that's good. Let's jump right in. I would love for you all to just do this quick reflection. Perhaps share in the chat if you'd like. Just what is skillful communication to you? What is skillful communication? As you even think about, reflect on those words, skillful communication. Yeah, what do they prop up for you? And again, there's no right answer or wrong answer. It's really where you are right now in this moment, what that feels for you, how that feels for you. So I'd love for us to.
Greetings. We can share out loud. This is Dawn in North Carolina.
Sure.
So happy to be here. So I think this is why I'm here. I believe that skillful communication is done in a very intentional and direct way. And when I say direct, in being clear on expressing what our needs are, the why behind that, and also ensuring that people buy into the why, so that they themselves see themselves in that communication. And so I do think it's tied to attentive and deep listening, all the things. And again, I can go on, but I do want to pause and make sure I'm creating space for others to respond.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Dawn. And I know that Selena shared in the chat For them, it's an intentional use of language to express oneself and understand others. Luke shared the ability to communicate your thoughts or messages effectively to others. So beautiful. I love this. You know, this is what we're really going to be delving deeper into. And hi, Danica. Great to see you back here. Welcome in. So I just want to kind of preface our conversation, and folks continue to share thoughts around this, particularly around this idea of communication. So let's pause on the skillful part of communication, but just the second word, communication. Based on the sciences, what we know is that communication is based on 20% of what we know, like that's in our intellect, what we think, right? And 80% of how you feel about what you know. So this is really important, particularly when we're talking about topics of diversity and bias and equity and other things. So of course, it's knowledge based. That's what communication comes from. 20% of it, it's uttered or listened to, or non-behavior, non-verbal, communication. But 80% is really rooted in our feelings about what we know. So just to kind of keep in the back of our minds. And I love this quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a peace activist. He passed away recently, transitioned in January of this year, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. King. And this is what he said. He said that we know very well that airplanes, guns, and bombs cannot remove wrong perceptions. Only loving speech and compassionate listening can help people correct wrong perceptions. But our leaders are not trained in that discipline. They rely only on the armed forces. Just let these words land for you, right? What he's talking about is really this idea of loving speech and compassionate listening, which are really the two components of skillful communication. And if you think about our system, our society around systemic racism, patriarchy, and the wars that are taking place across the world, just imagine for a second if the leaders that designed those policies had the capacity for loving speech and compassionate listening, what kind of world we would be in. And that's really the world we're trying to imagine together, where we can heal together. And that's kind of the crux of that, really begins with communication and skillful communication. So let's kind of delve deeper into this before you all talk about it with each other. I want to just kind of preface these two components of it. And we'll come back to this idea of this definition. So loving speech, what does that really mean? Kind of going deeper and deeper. So there's 4 components to what's known as loving speech. And there's a 5th kind of a optional one when we speak. First is really, it's truthful. So it's true and factual. That's really important. The second is really that it's useful. It's actually helpful and beneficial at the time when it's being spoken, right? The third is it's timely. So is this the right time to really speak it? The fourth, really important, is whether it's kind. Is it said with affection? So that's what we really mean by loving speech, skillful communication. And then the 5th, which is optional, which I feel like is like the advanced practice. Like for me, these four branches of it are already really sometimes challenging, but really an intention of bringing happiness when speaking, bringing happiness to oneself and others. So it's always about both. It's relational. It's not just about the other. It's also about us. So that's really kind of how we think about loving speech. And then this idea of compassionate listening, it's also known as deep listening, in many circles, like nonviolent communication and other forms. And what compassionate listening is really about this particular thing. We listen with only one purpose. And the purpose of our listening is to help another empty their heart or relieve their suffering. So this is our purpose. So we know who we are. We're not tied up in the stories of this other person, but we listen to help others relieve their heart. But while that's happening, we're being compassionate towards this other being. We're also compassionate towards what's happening for us. we're present to what's being shared, whether they're wrong or right perceptions from our life experiences. So it's not that we're forgetting it or saying that we agree with what's being shared, but it's like, oh, is this true for me, right? So really being present to what's being shared. And then most importantly, being present to the feelings that it stirs up for us. So you all know when we hear, speech that is cruel or abusive, how that makes us feel. So that is the level of presence we're talking about, how that makes us feel. So this is kind of just an overview, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in small groups. But I want to give you a little bit of context of how I came to understanding this idea of skillful communication. So for me, like my background, I was a scientist, a social scientist working in international human rights, and then moved into racial and gender equity after going to law school. Pretty quickly realizing that a lot of the advocacy work I was doing in Myanmar and Southeast Asia, we needed help here in the US, the kinds of racial disparities that are egregious across the board. And for me, the way I started that advocacy work was actually using a lot of words that alienated myself and other people around me. Very, very kind of adversarial. And of course, I was being trained in the adversarial system, being in law school. But, that tone of thinking really took me into a deep depression because it was constantly right or wrong, good or bad. And it didn't have the capacity to listen to other people's wrong perceptions. And that was really my journey around this mental health break, where I was like, oh my God, I almost became super suicidal. But thankfully I didn't, right? So I was able to really recover and also think about, well, what's going on around this idea of communication and how I'm speaking and this aspiration I hold for our world. So this journey really began, with a lot of different modalities around leaning into the 80% of how I feel about what I know, right? So how do I feel about these ideas of white supremacy or systemic racism or patriarchy or homophobia? That's a lot of unpleasant things. And that's okay, but that's why we build the practice of leaning into those unpleasantness of those things. And it basically brings up the terrain of feelings. And that's what we really need to heal for ourselves, And for me, the conclusions that I come to over and over again, which is why practice is so important around this, particularly mindfulness practices, is where do I have control? And where I feel like I have control, again, this is just to me, this is not the right way. There's no the way. This is a way, right? That has worked for me, which was that my response to my thoughts and emotions. I have control over that. Thoughts I probably don't have control over because my thoughts just arise all the time, right? But the way I respond to them, that space between my thought and how I act, there's control there. Same thing, I don't have control over the feelings I have about these deep, deep inequities in our society, but I do have control over how I respond to it, my feelings and emotions, and that, as well as my words and my actions. So that is really, I think, kind of the crux of what skillful communication is about, which is really developing the skill, this competency, this strength to bridge the future, which is how we want things to be. An equitable world, a place where everyone belongs, a place where we can truly heal and restore our humanity with the now, how we are now, and how things are right now, and being able to really hold things as they are, not how they should be, but as they are, so we can really hold hands and work together to create the world we want. And for us, it'd be more like developing skillful communication is it's like an essential skill, to really kind of further the work of equity and belonging. So let's practice now. I've shared a lot of words. I'm sure it's landed in various directions for you all. But I'd love for you all we're going to break you up into dyads, into groups of 2. And what I'd love for you all to share in these groups of 2 is, what does racial healing mean to you? What does that mean? Even this idea of racial healing, what does that mean to you? And as you're in this group with these other people, with this other person, really practice loving speech as you share from your own experience what that means for you. And then deep listening, right? When the other person shares. Again, this is not generally about a conversation. It's really bearing witness to another person and bearing witness to ourselves. You can, of course, introduce yourself. And just a reminder around our shared agreements, using I statements, commitment to dialogue, staying present, investigating discomfort. It's really cool. You're all scientists. And then privacy and confidentiality. So let me stop sharing. And then Colleen will just break you up into groups. We might have a group of 3, given the number of people here, but we will see you back here in 6 minutes. So take about 2 minutes each, and then 2 minutes of just discussion. Well, welcome back, everyone. This is kind of the least favorite part of my job, which is to break up these wonderful conversations you all are having. And I also love that some of you have the cameras on so I can see you. So please, if you're willing, please keep that on. But let me share my screen again. I would love to actually continue this conversation, but now just in a bigger forum. So one thing I'd love for us to for you to think about right now is really as you spoke or listened, so either one, if you were practicing loving speech or deep listening, what did you notice in your body and in your mind, as you were engaging in this process? And just to remind you what skillful communication really is. Once again, it's really, loving speech is about truthful, true and factual, useful, timely, and kind. Like those are really the 4 components of speech, the speaking part of it. And then the advanced practices, when we speak, we have an intention of bringing happiness. So I always think about speaking to my, my pet or, my nieces. It kind of meets that intention of bringing happiness, when I speak to them in that way, in certain times. And then deep listening is really about to help another empty their heart. So that it's just about the other person, giving you a space to just empty, clean, cleanse. But while we do that, being present to what's being shared, what's the content of what they're sharing, and the feelings that they're stirring up, for you. So with that, I will stop sharing, but I'd love to, have us speak for a little bit with each other in a big group. Shannon shared in the chat. I get very nervous talking to anyone, especially someone new. That's great. That's great that you're noticing that, right? That nervousness. Because part of the opportunity here is, what is that nervousness? What is the feeling that it stirs up? What are the emotions, the thoughts that they stir up, right? And also, as we begin to become observers of our own experience in this way, the way you've described your experience as nervousness, you can begin to really go to the root of it over time. When did it start? Why? What are the stories in the mind around speaking to someone new? Again, there are no right or wrong answers, but this is where we get to be in the terrain of our feelings. So thank you for sharing that. Brittany shared, I was nervous at the beginning because I usually am when meeting someone for the first time. Absolutely. And also we're talking about racial bias and racial healing. So that topic also has a lot of other associations, right? So I want to acknowledge that. But we had the same viewpoints that made me happy. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Any other reflections from the dyad group? Like what came up for you in your body or your mind? You just unmute yourself and speak.
I can share.
Yeah, please.
I think it's helpful to be able to reflect on it a bit more because I realize I'm not incredibly observant of how I'm feeling while I speak, unless I'm really, really anxious. But I did notice that I tend to feel pressure to be really concise when I'm sharing, like I don't want to take up too much time or like hog the conversation or like talk too much. And like that's a reoccurring thing for me. And I definitely felt that, especially like it's a timed, you have a limited amount of time. So I'm like, I got to get it in quick and I got to be really purposeful with each word, even though I'm kind of processing as I go. So just also noticing like the pressure that I put on myself to do that is interesting.
Oh, such a beautiful share. And I relate to that so much. But it's, yeah, it's again, observing that, not needing to change it, being like, oh, hey, this has come up again. What's that about, right? So that's kind of the new seeds that we're planting around this. Thank you for sharing, Selena. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll share.
Please.
So
yes.
In my conversation, you know, I mentioned that, you know, anytime that you talk about race, you are bringing your experiences to that conversation. And it's not always an easy thing, even for a Black woman. And so when I have these conversations on race, I am bringing my experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, you know, to the table. And so something I mentioned, you know, when we talk about racial healing, it's important to acknowledge the past and also the present. You know, it's almost like a starting point, but it's kind of hard to get to the racial healing point in my mind if you're still being wounded, almost like a scar. How do you expect it to heal when you're still being wounded, right? And so that was something that I discussed, you know, with David during my conversation.
It's a really profound point, Yvonne, and it's so central to this work, right? Because as you shared, so much of what's happening in our world continues to happen in, you know, in our country, in our communities, locally to nationally to internationally, is that idea of this perpetual wounding, right, that we may experience. And there's no answer to this, you know. This is why the journey of healing is really, can be personal as well. For me, what's been really helpful is to begin to notice, you know, the stories that I sometimes believe the external world wants me to believe about myself. As a gay person, as a man of color, as an immigrant, you know, what are those stories? And I find that there's still parts of me that feel wounded or defensive, at least in my body and mind, is believing those stories, which is why I want to fight back. There's a Thich Nhat Hanh, you know, when he talks about compassion, deep listening or compassionate listening, he basically says sometimes in a conversation, particularly around race and racism, if someone is saying something that you don't agree with, right, or it's not your experience, but they're making a blanket statement, you know, in that moment, we listen, we give them the space to empty their heart, but we can also create a boundary. It's as if like, here, like I want to give you this gift, but you're like, oh, I don't want it. It's not for me, right? So you refuse to accept it. So it's kind of like a mental checkpoint that we can make to support us. And again, it's a habit that we can develop, particularly in these interpersonal contexts where wounding is, particularly, you know, as a Black person, as a Black woman, with the intersectionalities of so many identities. But yeah. So I appreciate that thought.
We have to find a way. We have to find a way. Maybe I do.
Yes.
But to delink myself from everything else that might be whiteness, because I have been on that side since Little League as a kid, going, where the hell is the smart? Why aren't the coaches shutting these crude people in the back of this bus up, and as they're yelling crap out the window? And the pop bottle flew in my open bus window, not the big mouse in the back. And then we ended up in the hospital with the guy next to me's lip from a pop bottle. And none of that was necessary had the adults in the bus done something, and they didn't. And you know, that was the 60s. And then I was on Martin Luther King's side. it made sense to me. And I have struggled a lot in my life wondering, why in the hell did it only make sense to me? Or why did it not make sense to apparently to so many others, that it's content of character, not color? I mean, I thought the world was going to buy into this, how naive I was. And what a pain in the butt to have to take. We're not a monolith. And yet, you know, I so don't want to be the abuser that keeps the nice woman I spoke with feeling persecuted, because man, I don't want that for my world. I don't want that for her. And boy, I don't want to be grouped with the people that are doing that. And how do I break those links and say, whoa, brother, shut the hell up. This is just crap coming out of your mouth. Those people, those kids on the street didn't deserve what they were hearing from the back of the school bus as we were in line to go to a ball game as kids.
Yeah.
So it's been a battle, and then, you know, I'm going to say that part of it is I have the nerve or the willingness to say Bill Cosby was a hero of mine for most of my life and his. He introduced me to the commonality of growing up in a bedroom with a brother, 60 miles south of where I grew up in a bedroom with a brother, and the commonality between his stories and him making it funny and you know what happened in the end, that's not, I don't know where the man's at, but for a lifetime he created some wonderful bridges. I thought that I will just admit that for me they existed, and I'm glad I traveled over them.
So this is a great time to actually like, well, what do you do about it? You know, thank you for sharing that, David, but also to catching yourself around, we need to find a way to, I need to find a way, right? Because within that, you notice the discomfort you feel as someone who cares about equity, who cares about equality around what's happening in our country, particularly among people, you know, who may look like you, who share your background. So I think for me, this is the work. And this is why, you know, for me, when we talk about breaking bias or being more, it's really about building competencies. We need skills. So you mentioned the civil rights movement, you know, the student nonviolent, you know, coordinating committee. Those folks were actually training in being beaten. They were training their nervous system and being called lots of abusive language. You know, they didn't just wake up one day, it's like, I'm going to go sit on the, you know, countertops and someone's going to drop hot coffee on me. It was a training of the nervous system. So we need that similar training, but this time it's not just conscious racism or conscious sexism, it's also unconscious bias, which is how our minds have been polluted by these stories of dehumanization of anyone who is other. And to do that, you know, the social sciences, for me as a scientist, this is what's promising, is that there's specific competencies that we can measure. So it really has to start with awareness and comprehension. A lot of folks in our country still believe that teachers, doctors, lawyers, that there's a biological basis for race, that people of color are genetically inferior. So this is misinformation. So unless we can correct the misinformation, we can't move to the other competencies, which is about, you know, building competencies like optimism, curiosity, skillful communication. So important. Language. The same language that can cause wars can build bridges. You know, and moving to well-being, collective identity, empathy and compassion, and then empowerment and social cohesion. So the way this is broken down, this is the Be More journey. It starts in the left brain, the learn stage. We have to learn these skills. We have to know what they're about. And then we have to develop these 4 skills, the ones in teal. This requires practice. So what we do together, you know, in a small dyad is practice that. But we practice that not just in, hopefully not just here, but every day with our family members, with our friends, with our colleagues. And then that leads to propel. This is about action. So what do you need, David, for example, to stop that person is to feel empowered, to feel social cohesion, which is different from collective identity, which is feeling connected to people that are not part of our group, that don't look like us. Social cohesion is then being able to collaborate with them. This is what we're talking about. We talk about collusion, you know, allyship. This is about social cohesion. So this is what our work is about, you know, together. So I know we're at time. I'll definitely stick around afterwards for any questions and insights you may have. But I just wanted to share that we would love for you to kind of, this is our work, our bread and butter. We'd love for you to join us, follow us on social media at Be More with the New. We share a lot of content around this, and we really want to be that, the container for solutions orientation around this work. Really thinking about how do we bring this together so we can do healing work together. And the second thing, for anyone who's interested in this work and really building these 10 competencies and dismantling systemic racism, we have a Breaking Racial Bias membership community, which is really about supporting you in building these communities, this work within your organization and communities. So if you work in an organization, have yourself and your teams be a part of this community. There's 4 or 5 components to this course. There's coaching. There's, of course, a community aspect of it with other professionals from across the country. You can get a certification in breaking racial bias. And then, of course, metrics, kind of being able to see your pre and post progress on those 10 competencies. Before we kind of stop, I want to just say that, please take some time after the session, just to kind of come back. Talking about healing and these challenges could be emotionally triggering, could be challenging for the nervous system. Just have some time for recovery, 15 to 30 minutes. You can go for a walk, drink some water, stretch. Whatever you do, hopefully, even if you can just stand up and like do 5 jumping jacks to move it around, move the energy around. And then lastly, I'll stick around for any questions you may have for office hours. I just want to end with this one quote that I love. It's from Proverbs, the Bible. There's a reason why God or nature or evolution, if you don't believe in that, gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. 2 ears and 1 mouth. And it kind of goes back to this idea of, deep listening, loving speech, kind of really returning to that over and over again. So I'd love for you all to share, any commitments you're making around this for your own healing in the chat. And then, thank you so much for sharing and for coming and for being here. I didn't notice the time myself, it kind of flew by today, but I'll stick around for any thoughts and questions. Thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you next month. We'll have another event in late May. But if you have any questions, feel free to jump right in. Any thoughts, ideas? Thank you, Dawn. Continue to embrace the learning journey. Amen to
that. So yeah, just more of an appreciation and gratitude for holding this. In terms of my healing journey, I've just been perusing Eventbrite, typing in like random things like deep listening and racial healing. And so acknowledging like how I found you all.
Oh, that's great.
So just again, a true appreciation for the ways in which people open up the giving spirit, like being open to just give this and hold this as a space that you don't have to monetize. So again, appreciation of that. And, I just followed you on Twitter and I'm looking at your website. So just really interested in learning more about the work that you all are doing and the ways in which, I can continue to embrace, my learning journey. So appreciative of you.
Thank you so much for that.
And how are you doing this,
Yeah, it's really about, this is the work that sustains me and heals me, right? So my healing is dependent on your healing and yours on mine. We're truly interdependent and interconnected in that way. I know Yvonne is here. I wanted to share, Yvonne, I watched this interview that Viola Davis did with Oprah last night on her new book, Finding Me. It is probably one of the most powerful interviews I've ever seen. So I highly recommend it, actually for everyone. But I think the way you share it, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a woman who's kind of, Viola is a woman who's kind of overcome so many internalized biases and is kind of thriving. So I think that was just, a thought. Any other questions or thoughts or ideas?
I would share one.
Yes.
I'm 67 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and the world has become a much nicer place in a lot of ways. There might be road to travel yet. There surely is. And we'll all have our exit ramps at some point, but the road I have traveled has changed a lot. I mean, we had an interracial president not all that long ago. We have a mixed marriage in the White House now, in the vice presidency, and these things are normal to anybody younger than me. But I don't know. I don't buy into all these divisions and generations. I do get that those born perhaps after 9/11 are looking at a whole different world that a guy born in the 50s may not even understand. So I get it, but a lot has changed. I had the opportunity to get to know Tom Hayden a little bit. And he was asked at his son's wedding what he thought of the interracial marriage his son was endeavoring upon. And he kind of just looked at the reporter and said, "What, she's not human?" And the people around him knew what he was getting at. The reporter just wasn't getting it. And he finally just said, "Look, when maybe 50 million more couples decide to follow them, this will all go away."
Right. David, I want to kind of stop you there actually, because I know I want to be mindful of time, but one thing I wanted to share here that's really important, right? And I understand that this is a generational thing and you grew up in the 1950s, but I think this is why awareness and comprehension is so critical. The idea of race itself is built upon a false premise that
Right.
there are different types of human races. And the idea of race itself is built upon the premise that one has to be pure white, 100% European ancestry measured by their blood quanta, right? In order to be the dominating group. So you say that, there's a mixed marriage of Barack Obama or Kamala Harris. That's true. But the vast majority of Black Americans and the vast majority of Latinx Americans and Indigenous Americans and many Asian Americans actually have European ancestry. But because of the way race has been designed, it's about keeping this purity complex alive. So it's really not about, 50 million more people entering mixed marriages, because one thing we have to understand that despite all of that, the rates of incarceration and racial disparities in our country have not changed in the 1960s. And that is because at the end of the day, there's a lack of empathy, because it starts from this idea of false premise that someone with one drop of non-European or non-white blood is somehow infected. And that's why the work is so important around starting with that level of awareness and comprehension. Because until we can get to it, I've seen so many people in, relationships, marriages across ethnic or racial groups, yet those unconscious biases still come up. So this is why the work of cleaning our minds is so important. And I understand that a lot of this is not taught in our schools. It's not taught in our colleges. It's not taught in our medical schools, in our law schools. I'm a lawyer myself. I was never learned this stuff until I learned it on my own. But this is why I think the conversation has to be more than just, oh, the young people will take care of it. Just some thoughts here, because those young people are being reared by the same people who hold these often challenging ones.
I have to respectfully disagree to a bit. The face of culture today is much more integrated in all the social, let's say the more liberal viewpoints. I do watch too much TV, and the face of culture through the television is drastically changed. And you now can go back, I now can go back and watch shows from the 50s and 60s that and they were groundbreaking, to have the Bradys in the same bed and Julia, a Black nurse in the 60s. These were groundbreaking, where today It's all over. The hospital scenes are completely mixed and integrated, and there's very intelligent people from all around the world on my screen now, and none of that was there before. So the cultural reflection that the young are, if you can see it, you can be it. That's a terrific campaign, because I wasn't allowed to see it quite from through the same lens. And those lenses are different now.
I agree
in
with
my
that,
opinion.
actually, 100%. I totally agree with that. That's why it's so complex. And I'm so grateful that you're here to continue to kind of engage in this conversation. I hope you continue to show up in this way, because you're right. There has been a lot of progress, and there's more progress to be made. And this is why we need each other to do that together.
Yes, and you know, I want to love all of humanity, and it's a difficult thing to say depending on where the audience is, because it's a struggle for me to be different, to be a liberal Quaker from the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting that at some point founded Greenpeace and Amnesty International and ran a railroad and did things over the history of my ancestors that I'm a part of. And that makes me different and not accepted by pockets of people that are similar to me. And the nerve to stand up and challenge them. It's easier when you're old. The value of time becomes more, I don't have as much to worry about, I guess. But anyway,
Well, thank you so much.
I
for
love this
sharing, and
conversation, and I'm
appreciate it.
listening is where my skills are the weakest probably, and I'm sorry for that. But I have enjoyed you stimulating my mind.
Well,
So
thank you all
thank
so
you.
much. And I will see you again hopefully next month, and take good care of yourselves. Bye-bye.